Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is overshadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish?
All right, well, today we are beginning the third chapter of James, and the last few weeks we've been covering the well, we had a couple lessons on just coronavirus in general, and how we deal with all this. But then we've been going through the book of James, and we have reached the third chapter. So they're halfway point, really, I guess. So there's 5 chapters total in this book, and we are in the middle now. Dale, both of us in our day jobs work in schools, and I teach at a high school. You're a guidance counselor, and you get to access a lot of kids and really teach them on all kinds of things at a middle school level. The very first verse of this chapter starts talking about the responsibility of teachers. Now, of course, the teachers it's talking about here are those that are Bible teachers, those that are spreading the gospel, teaching the word. I think the King James Version uses the word masters in this. But the verse says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." One of the things I've been teaching as long as I've been married, 22 years. One of the things that they preach to us in new teacher in-service and training is that we have a responsibility that's different from other professions. That because we work with kids, the extra responsibility of setting an example for those kids and showing them the right way to go. We have much more than just if we were working maybe in another profession or not doing that. And I know it's the same way regardless of the level that we work with, elementary, middle, high school, whatever. James is telling us here, taking that into Bible teachers. This is an even bigger responsibility. Right. Talking about a stricter judgment. What we do in the classroom every day relates to what these kids, their everyday life. We're guiding them through this life, but the teachers he's talking about here, this is eternal. Right. These consequences of doing this job wrong or doing this job badly can have eternal consequences. Yeah. And so, I think he starts out with that. And of course, anybody that's ever taught knows what's the easiest way to get in trouble when you're a teacher. It's by your mouth. It's by things you say to people. Maybe you speak too quickly and you say something you didn't mean, or something's misconstrued, or maybe you misinterpret something, or your listener misinterprets something you said. So the words that we use and the way we use our tongue, and that's what this section is going to be about, really becomes important to how that how that student-teacher relationship says. And if what we're teaching is Bible, then it's even more important. Right. So that's how he sets up this entire section on the tongue. I mean, we're going to be looking today at the first 12 verses, most of which is about the tongue. He uses a lot of metaphors and comparisons in this, which I think is kind of typically how James teaches. He likes to use little short comparisons to everyday objects or things that his listeners would have understood. Right. So let's look at the first few verses after that. So he sets the stage with, teachers and how that's a stricter judgment. But then he goes into the biggest problem that teachers would have. And so I'll start reading again in verse 2. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, also able to bridle the whole body. So before we move into the examples here, so James saying that the hardest thing for us to avoid, the hardest sin, maybe, the hardest mistakes for us to avoid are mistakes of the tongue. I think I don't have the urge to go commit murder.
No.
No, I don't have the urge to, go do drugs or commit adultery or those type of things.
Right.
But do I want to lash out at somebody that cuts me off in traffic?
Hey.
Yeah, maybe. Is there maybe a person, maybe one of my students at school, or maybe somebody that, maybe one of their parents, who rubs me the wrong way, and I want to lash back out at them in anger, or maybe, get in an argument with them or something like that?
Yeah.
That urge exists.
Very quick reaction there.
Right, and so, I mean, James tells us that if you can keep from stumbling in what you say, you must be perfect.
Yeah.
Because that's the sin, I think, that we are, as humans, most apt to do.
Yeah, because you'll say something wrong, but not realize it till much later.
Right. I mean, whether that's hurting somebody's feelings or whether that's, sometimes somebody says a word they shouldn't, and say, oh, that slipped out or something, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But, I think that sins of the tongue are some of the ones that are the easiest for us to fall into, regardless of what type of sin of the tongue that could be. We'll get into some more examples in just a minute.
And I think you might be insinuating here that, some people might think, well, I never say anything wrong. I think that's possible here. But he says, he presses upon us, well, if you say that, you're a perfect man, and it's easier to recognize, well, I guess nobody's perfect, So he's really, does a good job of laying it out well here for people to understand and accept, I think.
Right. And he says, if you're not stumbling in word, you must be able to control every other urge or every other type of temptation.
Right.
You must have control over that and bridle the whole body, because the tongue's the hard one to attain. But moving on, and he starts to give us a couple of examples here of what his listeners would think of, what they would be able to apply that to easily. What are some concepts they understand in their everyday life? Verse 3, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we may turn their whole body. You ever ride horses?
Oh, yeah.
I think I've been on a horse one time in my entire life, and that was on a field trip in elementary school. But the concept is one that we all understand, whether or not we ride horses. That's part of it. You put a bridle on these horses, and you're able to control it. I think maybe today a more an example that we would all understand more is you put a leash on a dog. So you can control them to a certain extent. And I think a lot more of us have. I don't personally, but a lot more around here have dogs than have horses. But the same kind of idea. Verse 4: look also at ships, although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. I actually went out fishing yesterday, and for a couple hours I stood on the bank but saw all kinds of boats out on the lake yesterday. It was busy. I was at like 3 different boat ramps actually, driving around trying to find a good place to fish. And man, people are out on the lake today. But you see, there's, it doesn't take much to drive even a small little fishing boat around. But just imagine these big ships. The comparison, the ratio to the size of the rudder to the size of the ship is, crazy how small a thing can control, such a big ship. And, it got me to thinking in reading this verse, small things influencing or having effects and influence on greater things. And, of course, everything comes back to the virus, this tiny little thing that we don't even see affects everything that we do. And the smallest little thing that in this case we're talking about sins of the tongue, the smallest little word you say in the wrong way can have huge consequences.
Exactly.
And I'd say, to wrap up this little section, verse 5, even so the tongue is a little member, it boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And once again, just another example of something really small, one little match. I remember those Smokey the Bear commercials when we were growing up. Only you can prevent forest fires, and the stuff about the matches. Or back then, cigarettes were a big thing, and less so now. But people flick those out their window and start a fire that they didn't mean to do, and they didn't think anything twice about it. But would have large consequences. We went. When I know you've seen those effects too from all those fires in Gatlinburg a couple years ago, and how close it got, and how much it affected that area, and just some kids starting a little fire, and it burned all that area, and did all that economic damage to that area and that town, and a place we all love to go. We've been many times, and but the things we say, the words we use, have just as important consequences as what we say. Well, Dad, why don't you go ahead and read? How about the next 3 verses 6 through 8?
All right. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire excuse me, the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beasts and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by the human race, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison.
I like how in verse 5 he introduces the idea of, the little fire and a great forest, and then he takes that same idea and takes it in a different direction. What he's talking about in verse 5 is about a small thing going to a big thing, but he's put that idea of fire in their mind. Okay, so now we're taking fire in a different connotation of fire, and of what that can do. The tongue is a small member. It says but it's a fire. It's a world of iniquity. It's a lot. When it says a world of iniquity, it's not just a small vessel of iniquity. There's a lot a lot of consequence that comes from what the tongue can do.
Right.
But now, the next phrase in this verse 6, the tongue is so set among our members it defiles the whole body. What do you think he's trying to say here? It's so set among our members. Is he talking about where it is in our body? Is he talking about its role? I think of the tongue, it has multiple roles. It allows us to speak and enunciate words. It also has something to do with what we take into our body as far as eating and digestion. I think of, what are all the different things he's talking about?
Yeah, I think to sum it up, it means the consequences of our tongue. It's what comes out of the heart of a man which defines him. Well, how do we speak of what comes out of the heart? Well, it's from our mouths, it's from our tongue. So what you say, what you speak to somebody then looks at you, at your entire body. If you were to speak evil, they're not saying, well, that messy little tongue inside his mouth shouldn't have said that. They're looking at the entire person that's standing before them. So I think it's illustrating the consequences of our tongue and how we speak and what we speak of. Because the next little phrase there sets on fire the course of our life. It's kind of like if you had a long fuse to a stick of dynamite, you light that and it's going to set that course on fire. Or if you were to lay down gunpowder, it would set that on fire, and it's going to take you in a particular direction. And here he's trying to emphasize it's going to be a negative direction if you're not careful of what you say.
Right. The image that pops to mind when you say the string of gunpowder is the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote.
Oh yeah,
we want
sure. That's where I learned that trick. Watching Saturday morning cartoons.
We won't go that any further than that. Then the last part of that where it says it's set on fire by hell. We're influenced and tempted by Satan, and I think that's what it says when it's set on fire by hell. It's talking about the influence that Satan has, that evil has on what we do.
Right.
And if that course is being set on fire, that course of nature, course of our life is being set on fire in a negative way, that's where that comes from, I think, is what it's saying. That comes from
that iniquity he just mentioned.
Right.
You know, it's coming from hell, man.
The temptation that we get from Satan there. And, you know, we can choose to follow that or, you know, turn away from that. And then the next thing, you know, he uses nature again, beasts and birds and creatures of the sea and reptiles, and mankind has tamed all of those. And then, but no man can tame the tongue. So again, he's comparing a small part of our body, a small part representing, you know, how we speak, how we do that, to these huge things. You know, am I taming some tigers, or am I taming some, you know, you guys have a dog, you get that dog trained, I'm sure, but you know, but is it as easy to train the tongue?
No, not at all.
That's what he says.
Not at all.
We have a comment here from Brother Barry Jarvis. It says, man chooses self-indulgence. God is not going control of the tongue there. So he's saying, I think, that self-indulgence is where the use of the tongue comes from in the bad way, instead of what God wants us to do.
Yeah, we're fleshly beings. You know, we struggle with the flesh versus the spirit, and our tongue, it shows through our tongue. We say those things. If we're not careful, we'll say those things that show, hey man, you know, you're really following the flesh rather than the spirit.
Right. And it says in the end of verse 8, it is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. So we have to me that says that the nature of what we want to say is we are constantly tempted to want to use the tongue in a negative way. Whether that's speaking, you know, in anger, like we mentioned, speaking in anger. We're about to talk about blessings and cursings a little bit, you know, the words that we speak or the way we speak those words, either one. It's something we have to constantly work to tame. It's not just something we fix and it's done forever. We constantly battle against that our whole life, really.
Right.
Okay, so I'll keep reading the next section here, starting in verse 9. Speaking of the tongue again, with it, our tongues, we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. And again, he gives us an exhortation and then gives some examples relating to, you know, what those things are, similar to what he's done earlier in the chapter. You know, with our tongues, with our mouth, with our words, we worship like we're doing today. You know, we come together, we pray, we sing, we do these things. But then, you know, when we're not in worship, what kind of things are coming out of our mouth then? You know, what things are we saying? What kind of words are we using? What kind of sentiments are behind the words we're using? You know, we can come here and have this, and I've got about a 25-minute drive home. Am I going to be yelling at the people on the highway and gesturing toward them and having, no, that's, you know, again, don't want blessings and cursings to come out of the same mouth. Even though there are some people that drive annoyingly slow on Highway 25, but we won't get into that. That's fine. That's their prerogative. I won't yell at them too much. But this idea of opposite things coming out of the same, you know,
that
mind.
seems to be what he's trying. What he's battling here is people thinking, hey, I can say whatever I want. You know, when I'm in the temple or at church, you know, visiting with the Christians, I can say this way and I can speak this way when I'm out. And James saying, no, you can't do that.
Right. You know? And I like the examples that he gives. Again, things that people in this day would easily understand. Fresh water and salt water. You know, I think of, they lived in that area where they've got the Sea of Galilee, and just a few miles away, the Dead Sea, the saltiest sea in the world. You know, and they understood very clearly the difference between fresh water and salt water. I mean, they had to deal with it in their everyday lives all the time. Here in Tennessee, we don't see much salt water.
No.
There's not a lot of that. We got to drive a little way to get to some salt water.
True.
But but they understand that. And then things like the fig trees and the olives and grapevines, and these people are dealing with. They have gardens. They work in these settings. They're the agriculture that we see so many references to throughout the Bible really speaks to the world they lived in and the culture that they had at that time.
Definitely.
Well, I think looks like we've gotten to the end of our section for today. Do you have any other comments you want?
No, I think that's great. I'm really enjoying the study of James. So glad to see all of those who have joined us. See a lot of friends from school. Thank you all for joining us. And, any final comments on that?
Next week we will continue on into we probably will finish chapter 3 and get into chapter 4 just a little bit. There's only a few verses left here in chapter 3. As you know, the announcement did come out earlier this week that we are going to continue on with some with our virtual worship services, our online worship and classes for the foreseeable future until we have until we get some more information and we move into different phases, I guess, as we start to open everything up.
Right.
We want to make sure that everybody's safe, and this seems to be working pretty well.
I think so. I'm enjoying it.
We've had lots of engagements on Facebook with not only with our classes, but the sermons and the song services and the devos on Wednesday night. Make sure that you're checking out those things. And the children's Bible class, I almost forgot about that.
Children's Bible class, I want to post those on Facebook in just a moment. They're actually on our webpage right now. If you'd like to check those out, the songs that Jim has put together for us on YouTube are also there. And our lesson today, the sermon I'll be bringing to you, what does the Bible say about depression? So be sure to share that and all these other things on your social media. And you might notice we've got some new technology happening here. It's kind of behind the scenes, but maybe you notice this little banner right here in front of me and Jim. That's digitally put there by Mr. Jason Gardner. He's doing a fantastic job with our new technology, and you'll notice some online. You might notice some whenever you come here, whenever we are able to meet again. So the kids' Bible class, songs, and the sermon today, do keep those in mind. I hope you enjoy those. And Mr. Danny Bowman, one last comment. We'll let him have the final word before our prayer. How about that?
It says, Danny says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Hence, watch the heart also. Amen, Brother Danny. That is where all these things that the tongue are speaking are coming from. And so we have to be careful how we feed the heart as well.
Yes.
Whether the wrath of the storm tossed sea, or demons or men or whatever it be, no water can swallow